I can tell you it's not being believed very, very closely, or it's not really being believed at all by people here on the ground who have had to flee Ukraine because of what is happening in that country. They're seeking refuge, many of them in this country, in Poland. I had the opportunity to speak to one of them, Valentina, today. She explains what it was like to leave Ukraine.
Not good. But I don't want to come here. I love Ukraine, I love my home. I'm here, my family. My brother now, как будет на английском, на войне.
Stayed in Ukraine and fight with the Russian soldiers.
Fight against them.
Mm-hmm.
Are you worried for your brother?
Переживаете за своего брата?
Yes. Yes.
What does she want Canadians to know about what's happening to Ukraine?
Что вы хотите, чтобы что узнали жители Канады про Украину, что случилось в Украине?
Что случилось в Украине? Это просто временные трудности. Я не говорю ни про Россию плохое, ни про Украину. Все, это просто как бы политическая проблема. Мне жаль и ту, и другую сторону.
It's a political problem, and she hopes it will be not so. It take not so many time, and in some time everything will be all right.
Dziękuję. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the border crossing where we interviewed Valentina, where she and thousands of other refugees arrive day in and day out, there is largely an unregulated presence of aid agencies. They are quickly moved through that area with no registration, for example, and placed on shuttles and taken to either where I am right now or a train station, then moved on to their final destination. That process, because it is so unregulated, the UN says, means that there is danger lurking for refugees. I spoke with someone from the UNHCR, the agency's refugee aspect, or refugee agency, a little earlier. His name is Alexander Mundt, and he addressed those concerns. Have a listen.
They're coming here in, I think, quite a traumatized condition. We're seeing in the past few days quite high levels of vulnerability. Lots of elderly people, lots of people with disabilities, with chronic illnesses. And we've also seen some people going back in the other direction. Some families who didn't want to go very far from the border and who are going back to join fathers and brothers and husbands who've relocated and other family members who've relocated to the western part of the country.
And what's your sense of the function of this area right here? Because, walking through it, you notice it's almost like a pretty established aid infrastructure, but there's stuff everywhere. There's different agencies everywhere. Like, how does this function versus what happens at the next step?
Right. Yeah, this is sort of the welcoming party, and it looks like it's a very established aid infrastructure, but I actually think it's a bit of chaos. It's a mix of organizations with a very clear mandate to do certain things, and then a number of groups I've never seen before, providing everything from diapers to baby food to warm clothes so it's this mix of different groups, but I think all, coming from a good place and trying to help people, but I think it's quite overwhelming for people to come through, to cross the border. Sometimes a couple weeks ago, they were waiting 50, 60 hours to cross, and then you cross to this overwhelming sort of sense of welcome. And they're not here for very long. They're here for maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes, and then they're bused to reception centers or to the train station where they move onward. But it's quite a unique infrastructure. It's not the normal sort of humanitarian setup because there's no registration, there's no procedures here that people would go through. It's just maybe a warm meal, a place to warm up and sit down, and then they're moving on further inland.
And the people we're speaking to really are, in many cases, it feels like stunned by their circumstances, understandably, and unsure of where they're even going to head next. Where does the UNHCR fit in there? My understanding is, for example, cash is a big issue, and that you're trying to address that at this point.
Look, what we're trying to do, is a couple of things. One is to actually prepare them for arrival into Poland. So we've been, focusing a lot of efforts on mass information as they wait in the line to cross the border. So simple messages, don't accept a ride from anyone. All humanitarian assistance is free. Don't give up your documents to anyone. Because I think in this scenario, there's actually a lot of solidarity and a lot of good intentions, but also quite a lot of danger lurking just beneath the surface. So people really need to prepare themselves. Don't be shocked by it all, but do this, don't do this. What we've tried to do since day one is really focus on week 2. When the money runs out, or when what they thought was their plan maybe doesn't pan out, because over 2 million people have arrived in the space of about 3 weeks. So systems are overloaded, host families are overloaded. So what we've tried to put in place is a transitional cash program, which will basically enable people to enroll for cash assistance through UNHCR. It's roughly, depending on family size, 300 to 400 euros per month, up to probably 3 months, but can be extended. But the idea is really to give people back a sense of agency and an ability to make some decisions for themselves, for their families, about where they want to settle, about where they might be able to move, what they might need, what type of accommodation they might be able to find. So it's really that sort of interim grant to sort of give them a bit back of agency and allow them to stand on their own 2 feet, even in the midst of all this.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you've been here since February,
yeah.
Right? There have been some concerns raised by politicians in Ukraine, specifically the mayor of Lviv, for example, around whether or not the UNHCR, or the UN more generally, was adequately ready for what ended up happening on February 24th, that the buildup of troops didn't cause them or prompt the mobilization it should have. What is your sense on that?
Look, I think nobody saw this coming on this scale or with this degree of horror. Should we have? Possibly, but should everyone have? In retrospect, it's, hindsight is 2020. But I think there were several factors why we didn't have a big preparedness and contingency plan, because we also didn't want to throw fuel on the fire, or there was also political pressures of, don't necessarily over-prepare because it may lead to an inevitable. So I think we did our best to make some sensible decisions. So for instance, on this side of the border, cash takes quite a long time to set up and work through all the agreements with banks, because it's basically a system through, where people register and they go to a bank machine and they can take cash. But that takes quite a few weeks. But we thought that this is an area we could have huge impact. I will say, on the Ukrainian side, I think we worked incredibly fast to get supply pipelines up and running and get supplies moving. And they've assisted tens of thousands of people in the last week or two with emergency shelter kits.
We've also seen some concerns expressed, actually kind of right here at the border, from people, like students, especially from Africa, from countries in Africa. We've heard some reports, we've read some reports, I haven't witnessed them firsthand, but I certainly have read quite a few of those, as I'm sure you have, that they might be treated differently by officials. What is your sense of that? Have you seen any of that? And is there a role for the UNHCR there?
Look, I think there was probably some of that. We weren't able to directly confirm it, but I think what we had been heard when we interviewed people afterwards is that they were often, if people from Africa who are obviously not Ukrainian nationals, were put aside and held sometimes in not very nice conditions, which is not necessarily the problem. The problem is everybody has to have access to territory. And you can withhold or detain people temporarily to assess their documents, but it has to be done with some degree of humanity and in good conditions. And I think here, what happened was, I think the Polish authorities very quickly recognized that all of these people were equally fleeing Ukraine. So it is a different legal status to sort out of why they came and what their status should be in the country. But I think there's a real constructive recognition with authorities and partners on the ground that actually we have to handle this on a case-by-case basis and look at each case uniquely, depending on the circumstances of their arrival, the circumstances of their flight.
And there's also been, a recognition that, and I think we've witnessed, throughout a lot of recent history in Europe, European countries have not always been as welcoming to refugees as they are in this instance.
Yeah.
What do you think underpins that? Do you think that there is a difference? Have you noticed a difference, and your thoughts on it?
Look, I think, yes, there's a difference, but I also think if we understand it, these are their neighbors. There's a huge diaspora community, and I think it's always easier to put yourself in the shoes of people you know who've always been part of your community and this is happening to them. I think our challenge now is to expand that narrative and say, people coming from Afghanistan, people coming from Ethiopia, it's the same reason, it's the same fear, it's the same humanity. So I actually see this as an incredible response, and now our responsibility is to actually change the narrative and help people take that next step, if they haven't already, and say, yeah, a refugee is a person forced to flee in horrible conditions. They have no choice, and we have a responsibility to assist everybody. So I think hopefully this can be a bit of a game changer for all of Europe.
Hi, I'm Vassy Kapelos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.